Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. It is 2:04 p.m. on Saturday, the 22nd of March. Today, I want to talk about love, human love, and how and why this has been the most difficult lesson of my life. You know, for those of you who think I'm clever, or I have figured out a lot of things, or I've been graced with some insight from higher principalities or the divine, that's all true. But very often, when you study closely the lives of people like me, you will very often see a personal life that is very, very chaotic. And it may not be intentional. Mine, I don't think, was intentional. It was just probably, if I'm being honest, probably some really shitty stuff I did in past lives. And I accept that. I don't contest it. I don't fight it. Accepting what you have to go through in life is very difficult. And when you're younger, you rail against it, especially when you're raised in a society that's all about setting goals and achieving things, and other people seem to be able to do it. But for you, there's always something coming in at a 90-degree angle and sideswiping you, you know? Like a car at an intersection. And this is an indication that you're working off a lot of karma. And wow, we're really going to get into it today, because there's no way to explain these things without being a little bit critical. So if I have to go down that road, I'll go down that road. I'm not really going to worry about it. So those of you who have taken the time to read The Devil in Us, you know that I was born into an alcoholic family with my father in Alcoholics Anonymous. He pretty much joined when I was born. So his sobriety begins with my birth. And then on the maternal side of the family, you've got acute depression in my grandfather, and then ultimately a violent suicide by shotgun. And these things leave spiritual residue in your life, because everybody in a field of life, is a genetic similarity, and it goes from specific to general. But at a certain level, the whole human race is in one family. We have the genetics of the human race. Doesn't matter whether you're from Scotland, Japan, the Congo, or Saudi Arabia. We're all human beings. And our similarities are mind-boggling. The difference between a Nikola Tesla and somebody with Down syndrome is like a 0.02 genetic difference. There's only a small genetic difference, a few percentage, between a chimpanzee and a human being. A chimpanzee is over 95% the same DNA as a human being. Okay? So when you get up to the human level, despite all the behavioral differences and the various idiosyncrasies of races and peoples, whether it be the acute alcoholism of the Irish and Scottish, and that's true. It's not a myth. It's not a stereotype. Don't hide behind stereotypes, okay? There's nothing politically correct about the Talamanca Review. I'm here to tell the truth. And it is absolutely true that the Irish and Scottish have a tremendous problem with alcohol. And when you live that way for generations, what happens is it forms an anchor in the bloodline. Okay? And so, and what that means is you could have an Irish or a Scottish person of that DNA given up for adoption when they're 3 months old, and they will be raised in another family, let's say English or Portuguese or Italian, but that anchoring in the bloodline DNA of alcoholism will come to express itself in the person, even though there's been no environmental incentive, meaning you don't grow up watching your dad and your uncles and your mom and your aunts going to the pub and getting drunk or getting tipsy. You will definitely have this predisposition towards alcoholism. And it can also be entrained. It can go the other way. If an Irish or a Scottish family that drinks a lot adopts a child from another culture, the environment of alcohol will influence that child to drink. So this is how things get anchored into bloodlines. And we have a loosely defined science called epigenetics to try to define it at the genetic level. And then we have all of our cultural anecdotes, all of the little tropes and maxims we've been saying for centuries. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree and things like that. And they're true. They're absolutely true. Okay? It's absolutely true that for the most part, the black race has a harder time in a first world economy. They have a harder time getting along. They're not used to it because the genetic imprint is something much closer to nature. Doesn't matter that they've been in North America for 300 or 400 years. Doesn't matter. Now, there's a big adaptation going on now in the black race. And it's my intuitive belief, because I have no rational reason for saying this, but I keep getting these little insights and signs, and they're telling me this, so I'm going to repeat it. I've said it before. I think one of the things that's going to happen in this turning we're going through is there's going to be an incredible black renaissance. And when I say renaissance, I mean they're going to take over everything. Yeah, mathematics, science, literature, music, everything. It's their time in a sense. Whatever karma they created to put them through what they've been through, the debt is paid. And they're coming upon a tremendous resurgence and renaissance. Now, this is my belief. Again, no rational explanation for what I'm telling you. Just put it in your memory bank and let it sit there. And when you start to see it, you went, oh my God, Bruce McDonald predicted this. Okay? And you'll see it. Because inside all of us is really the same potential. It's difficult to make people understand that, but especially the way things work now. Because we're a very racist culture, the human culture. We're extremely racist, right? And here's a little truism nobody ever says out loud. The people who don't think they're racist are actually the most racist. Okay? It's better to just be honest about these things and tell the truth, you know? So race is a big thing, and the race I was born to was Scotch Irish. Okay, my mom's maiden name was Ross. My family name is McDonald. Um, my maternal grandmother's maiden name was Maher. And then, sorry, my paternal grandmother's maiden name was Maher, which is Irish. And my maternal grandmother's maiden name was, I think she might have been French. But I'm like the Canadian trifecta of early settlers: Scotch, Irish, French. But the predominant genealogy is Scottish, so I identify as Scottish, and I have a Scottish name, MacDonald, so I identify as Scottish. Now, when I was born into my family, I came in 1966, and the family had been laid waste by drink. Okay? Laid waste by drink. My maternal grandfather's suicide was largely the result of chronic alcoholism and the depression that creates over time. Because I'm going to explain something to you, and some of you might not like to hear this, but I don't care. It's my show, and I'm going to say it. When you get into the habit of something like drinking or smoking marijuana on the daily, and I mean like a decade or more, or with marijuana, probably the hooks are in after about a year or two. And if you can't stop smoking marijuana after a decade, you're going to be smoking it your whole life. Okay? And I'm talking about the people who smoke it continuously, every day, 12 months a year, year in and year out. There's people who literally live that way, and they don't see anything wrong with it. Somehow, marijuana has been given this pass. Oh, it's no big deal, right? Now, some of that is justified. I think the safest social libation, if you like, I can say these things, and if some of you come up here and visit me, and that's going to be happening more and more, and getting another house built, so there'll be a complete separate guest house for people to live in on my family property. You want to come up and spend a month or 2 months or 3 months or longer in Costa Rica, that's entirely possible. Some of you may smoke marijuana once in a while, and I'll smoke with you once or twice. Not much, though. But I think it's the safest libation there is. And I understand why so many people give it a pass. Like when Robert Downey Jr. was dealing with his drug problems a couple decades ago, where his life almost went completely off the rails. He did time in the LA County Jail. They kept pulling him over with crack pipes and loaded weapons in his vehicles in LA. I don't know. You have to be a certain age to remember the turmoil that Robert Downey Jr. went through. It really got out of hand after he did Chaplin, and he played Charlie Chaplin, which is maybe his best movie, by the way, as a pure actor. When he decided to get clean, he went and spent quite a bit of time with Woody Harrelson. Now, Woody Harrelson is a notorious pothead. And even though Robert Downey Jr. was coming off drugs, he didn't consider pot to be a drug. And a lot of people think this way, but it isn't true. Pot is one of the most insidious drugs out there, long term. Okay? Like nothing's bad once in a while. If you want to like so when we went to Panama, our guests Jim and Yoshi, our hosts Jim and Yoshi, they had a really good wine selection. And um my wife doesn't drink. I've never seen my wife drink. I think in all the time I've been with her, which is about um 7, 8 years now, I think the most I've ever seen is her have a half a glass, like a half a beer in a glass, and then she does the rim of the glass with a lemon wedge or a lime wedge, and she salts it, and that's the way and she puts ice in the beer. So it might be half a bottle of beer, and she'll drink, that's what she'll drink. But when we were in Panama, she had 4 or 5 glasses of wine. It's kind of funny, actually. And she really enjoyed the wine. And it was a perfect time for it, a perfect occasion for it. And she's got no desire to drink wine. And everything's good. Okay? Um, when my super soldier friend, and he's still my friend, even though I had to kick him, if he watches this podcast, John, you're still my friend, even though I had to ask you to leave. You got to close the back door in your head, and you can't let the demons through anymore, because I'm responsible for these people in this pueblo. I can't have organic portals up here. Okay? There's my message to you. But he really is a heavy pot smoker, but it wasn't such a huge thing. It was kind of like the Robert Downey Jr. thing. I mean, he came off heroin when he was up here. He literally detoxed. But after a while, it got a little bit boring. And if you don't think pot is an addiction, study the behavior of someone who smokes it every day and has been doing so for years, and they run out of pot. And you tell me that's not an addiction. Okay? Now, I say pot is the most innocuous, the least harmful of all the libations. And quite frankly, if you're going to be addicted to something, marijuana is the best thing out there. Okay? It's absolutely 100% the best thing out there. If you're going to be addicted to something. Okay? It doesn't make you violent like alcohol does. It doesn't make you depraved like cocaine does. It doesn't make you a criminal like heroin does because of the price of heroin. It doesn't make you depraved the way heroin does. Because people, once you get addicted to heroin, you'll do anything for heroin. You'll do anything, right? A lot of the whores, and I know that's a distasteful word, but they are what they are. I grew up with them. I have no real sympathy. Okay? A whore is a lifestyle choice, and they do it. They sell themselves to maintain heavy addictions, right? But so you'll do anything to get crack or to get heroin. You'll do anything you have to do to get it, and in doing that, you open yourself up energetically to all of these negative experiences, and you start to become a dumping ground for people's negative energy. Okay? Whores are a dumping ground for negative energy, male and female. Okay? And they can't stop that negative energy coming into them because the exchanges give them the money to keep the addiction going. But there's an insidious nature to pot as well. This is, boy, I said at the beginning of this podcast I was going to talk about love, but this is the way it goes on the Talamanca Review. I just sort of spiral out it's like a spirit comes into me, a narrative spirit, and what I'm going to talk about isn't really my choice. Some of the best podcasts I do, Like just before I go live on OBS and I start to record, like in the 10 or 30 minutes leading up to the recording of the podcast, I don't think I'm going to do it because I don't think I have anything to say. My mind is a complete blank. My heart has no energy in it in terms of expression energy. I got nothing to say. And then I crank up the system, I start recording, and some of my best podcasts come out. When coincidentally, when my mind is telling me not to do a podcast, you got nothing to say. And other times, like today, I'll start a podcast and say I'm going to talk about love, and I'll talk about love because that is on my mind. Human love. But what pot does is it look, unless you're a jazz musician or a writer and you work and you have to be creative and you work from home. I say creative, pot will loosen you up a little bit and let things through. It'll shut down some of your inhibitions and let you speak more clearly. I found it to be helpful doing the second draft of books at times. Um, you know, because the second draft or rewriting a book or editing a book is it's very tedious work. Like being a writer is very, very tedious. You have to be very attentive to rhythm, flow, language, grammar, structure, voice, the voice of the book, the voice of individual characters. You have to be consistent in that voice. Very, very, very difficult thing to write. And sometimes pot would help. Sometimes it would help you get in contact with the muse or allow the energies to come through. Pot is completely non-conducive with an inner life, a structured meditative life, a contemplative life. So if you choose pot, if you're going to be a daily pot smoker, you are literally shutting the door on a spiritual life. I know. Tough to hear. I don't know who needs to hear this. I don't know why I've been instructed to say these things. But you shut the door on a real life. Now, what pot does, because pot is the one I have the most experience with. I actually quit drinking at like 17. I started drinking at 15 because being raised in Ottawa, at 15, you could walk across the bridge to Quebec, and the drinking age in Quebec was like 18, but if you looked 15, they'd serve you. They'd let you into bars. So I started drinking at 15. When I was 16, I worked a construction job. I was out of high school. I had dropped out of high school. I spent an entire summer on a jackhammer, 90-pound jackhammer, breaking up a concrete floor in a warehouse. And I went drinking most nights. You know, when you're young and strong, you can drink till 2 or 3 in the morning, get up at 6 and go do a whole day's work. Doesn't bother you so much. But then when I started meditating, I stopped drinking. And I was smoking a lot of hash too. The French love hash, and when you're raised in Ottawa, you're in a very French culture. And so I smoked a lot of hash too. I gave it all up. Didn't touch anything again till I was like 37 after my divorce. So I went from 17 to 37, 20 years with, I mean, I could literally in those 20 years probably count the number of beers I had. Oh, actually, that's not true. I remember when I graduated from university, my best friend graduated from another program, and I went home to Ottawa, and we got a bottle of Johnny Walker Red, and we just got totally, totally drunk walking the streets of Ottawa, like completely and totally drunk. You know, so like once in a while, but that was like a celebration for finishing university. And but pot pot I don't know how many of you have seen True Detective season 1, but there's this occult principle in there. It's got it's I don't know if it really exists, but they kind of make it out like this Satan worship voodoo. They call it Carcosa, and it's him who eats time. And that's what pot does. It eats time. Okay? So as a human being, when we're existing in a moment, you don't necessarily have to be doing anything. But if that moment is not spent in pursuit of or in communication with the higher energies inside of you, you're just literally killing that time. You're killing time. Okay? And pot comes in and it creates this space where you just give up 3 or 4 hours. And whatever, all you can do is veg, play video games or watch Netflix or do whatever you're going to do. Now watch this. I'm going to connect it back to the beginning of the podcast now. This, if I may say, is the genius of the Talamanca Review. So the problem with that is when you lose your connection with the divine energies in whatever capacity you can contain them. But fundamentally, the divine energy is love. And love is a moment well lived. And it's not a moment that's exciting, but it's not boring. It may not be fulfilling, but it's not empty. These things are all based on production cycles, right? It's very fulfilling to finish a manuscript and publish a book. But existing in the divine current is not fulfilling that way, but it's very, very purposeful living. Okay? So the reason I bring this up now is that pot has become an epidemic. An epidemic. And everybody thinks it's okay. The way everybody thought having a few drinks was okay in the 50s. When Sammy Davis Jr. and Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin were running around. The Rat Pack. Always in Vegas or somewhere, having a good time, having a few drinks, chasing the ladies. And a whole generation was influenced by that. And then we got smart and we said, hey, drinking like that's not that good. We shouldn't be celebrating it anymore. Right? Same thing with tobacco. I mean, tobacco, it's physically harmful, but spiritually it's not that harmful at all, really. You're not, but physically you're harming your health. You're taking away your stamina. You're hurting your heart. You're hurting your lungs. But it's a habit, and people like their habits. Tolkien smoked a pipe. A lot of very distinguished people throughout history have used tobacco. Who cares, right? But it doesn't really do anything to your perception or your consciousness to such a degree that you become somebody different. Whereas when you smoke weed, you do become somebody different. Okay? And you start to kill time. And you get used to killing time. Now, people who smoke weed all the time, I call them show up people. Meaning they don't miss work like somebody who's hungover drinking alcohol. Okay? They can show up. They go home, they quietly smoke their weed. Maybe if they have kids, after the kids go to bed, but that's a horrible example for kids. Okay? They smoke their weed, and then they wake up and they do it again. Okay? And so I call pot the show up drug. And what pot does is it allows you to tolerate a circumstance that you would not tolerate if you were sober. Okay? So the most amount of weed I smoked in my life was from about from about 37 years old to 47. And those were the years where I was in my son's life. I did not have space or finances in my life for another woman. I wanted to focus on my son. I lived in a little apartment. I was working on my books. And I said, okay, I got nothing to do here for 10, 12 years except to get this young man I created into adulthood, to finish high school, become a man at 18, and I'm going to do this. But another part of me, the part of me that was creative and adventurous and connected to spirit, it wanted to go and do other things. It wanted to go back to Taiwan or China and teach English and live a different life and maybe get a girlfriend or get married again. But I couldn't do it. So I compromised with myself and I smoked weed. But here's the thing. Because I continued to meditate, there was a little mechanism in me that would not let me go too far. So after about 8 weeks of smoking weed, which for me, that would be, I don't know, what would I smoke in 2 months? Half an ounce? Okay? Which is, for those of you who smoke weed, you know that's not a lot of weed in 2 months. The average habitual smoker will smoke about an ounce of weed now, an ounce a month. Okay? The committed pot smokers, and their numbers are legion in Canada. And it doesn't help that there's fucking idiots like Joe Rogan out there saying this is a good thing and being a horrible example for people. And he is. Don't kid yourself. Okay? You know? And you notice how they dance around this. You know, when J.D. Vance or Donald Trump go on his podcast, there's, neither one of them will say, hey, Joe, I'm not sure smoking weed every day is a good thing. They just pretend like it's not going on. But it is going on. And in that regard, and also his advocacy of psychedelics for non-medical reasons, for psychic adventure. I was going to say spiritual, but it's not a spiritual experience. It's a psychic experience. And yeah, I know all the information is coming in. There's that guy who with the laser found the code. I get it. You could say, well, maybe he gained a little bit of consciousness through using ayahuasca. Look, that's horseshit, man. That's a little bit of the astral plane. Okay? It's no big deal. Okay? So Rogan does that too. Right? Constantly advocating, talking about the ayahuasca and all this stuff. And you really shouldn't do that stuff. Okay? So I'm sorry to pop people's bubbles. Right? Unless there is a trauma-based reason for doing it. So the psychedelics are very, very good with PTSD. Very good with PTSD. They will help somebody get through a very, very dark time if they're done sacramentally. They're done with somebody who knows what they're doing, who can shamanically guide the journey. And they're very good with veterans. Psychedelic medicine is very good with veterans. But if there's no medical use for it, you shouldn't be doing it. Okay? Just like opiates were developed to numb pain. And so you go back and you watch, Saving Private Ryan or any of the World War II movies. The principal thing the medic does, the first thing they do is, you want morphine. Yeah. Okay. And then you don't feel the pain anymore. You can numb the pain. Now, an interesting thing about opiates like morphine and heroin is if you use them while you're in extreme pain and you stop them when the pain goes away, you won't get addicted. Isn't that interesting? Okay? So it's almost like nature and the universe are telling you, this is the circumstance to use this stuff in. But being stupid, self-indulgent, first world North Americans and Europeans, we use this stuff recreationally. And then to compound the idiocy of it, people like Joe Rogan go out and advocate it as a beneficial thing. And it isn't. It isn't. Okay? So the pot epidemic in Canada started in the late 90s. Let me just see when they legalized it. It's been a while now, but I don't want to. I'm not huge on facts on the Talamanca Review, but some things. When was marijuana legalized in Canada? Recreational cannabis became legal across Canada on October 17th, 2018, with the passage of the Cannabis Act. Okay, fair enough. Um, but there was nobody getting charged for pot possession from about the late 90s onwards. I mean, they were still going after large grow-ops and dealers, but that was more fiduciary. It was about escaping taxes and all that stuff. And there were multi-millionaires. The bikers were doing a lot of the pot trade in Canada. And there was this one famous story. We have this huge brewing company. We have two big brewing companies in Canada. One is called Labatt's, and they do Labatt's Blue. You may have heard of it. And the other one is a company called Molson's, and they do Molson Canadian. Now they have many brands of beer, but those are the two most famous: Molson Canadian and Labatt's Blue. Okay, two huge brewing companies in Canada, billion-dollar enterprises. And there was an abandoned Molson warehouse north of Toronto, and the bikers took it over and retrofitted it with generators and electricity. And I don't know how they kept this secret. They must have been paying cops off. But they when they raided this place, I mean this was a pot operation that was probably $250 million a year. Okay? And that's the kind of stuff the cops were going after. I mean, if you got searched by the cops and they found like an eighth or a half a quarter in you, they would let you keep it. They wouldn't even take it from you. It depends. But if you did something they didn't like you were a criminal, and they couldn't charge you with what they knew you were criminally responsible for, they would take your weed, and then they might even charge you with possession. But it just became one of those things like jaywalking, where if the law got applied to you, the application of that law certainly was really not about weed. It's just about the cops thinking you're a scumbag and they can't get you for your scumbaggery, so they hang you up on a little bit of weed, right? But then a lot of the judges would throw it out. So, so we're going on, like, it's coming up on 30 years now that pot's been a big thing in Canada. And it's a pretty big thing over here. Um, not so huge over here though. I mean, this is still an old-fashioned Catholic society. When you say the word drug, many of the old, like if I say, like if my mother-in-law, she's in her mid 70s, if she knows, one of the nephews or something is one of my nephews, one of her grandchildren is, in their 20s smoking marijuana, she just goes, drugs. There's no difference between marijuana and cocaine to my mother-in-law. It's drugs. She's of that generation, right? And you still have that old world anchoring over here. And in North America, you'd have to go back to like the 1950s to get that kind of attitude, right? 1950s, yeah. And so what the pot does is it just eats up time. And the principal symptom of a society, not the individual who's using the pot, but the symptom of the society that gets so many people hooked on pot, is despair. Okay? It's despair. It's like this. It's like the Russian problem with vodka during the Soviet Union. There was so much despair. People would show up for complicated factory jobs completely pissed drunk in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Leningrad, what it used to be called. Alcohol was the big problem. Okay? Probably would have been pot had they known more about pot or had access to it in Russia. But I imagine the Communist Party in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, they really cracked down on pot because pot is not conducive for society building. Okay? Not conducive for society building at all. And so it also makes you a little more perceptually acute. And so, like, shit pops into your head when you're high. You see through things. And I'd say a big basis of what we call the conspiracy movement post 9/11 is rooted in excessive pot use. Doesn't mean what they're perceiving is wrong, but they probably wouldn't have been able to see it had they not smoked weed. And so governments have habitually cracked down on weed. You know, it's interesting because for those of you who have read Kathy O'Brien's Transformation of America, the MK Ultra survivor, or seen her interviewed, it's very interesting. She said, when you go through the MK Ultra programs, they don't have any problems with you doing hard drugs. Like, you can do cocaine, they won't bother you. They'll even get it for you, your CIA handlers. Not allowed to do pot. You know why? Pot breaks down the programming. Okay? So the way they honeycomb a mind to program somebody, pot can break that down. So in a sense, a lot of what's going on now is the result of so many people smoking pot. The problem is, once the pot has done its job and broken down the programming and you can see clearly, you should give it up. But nobody does because they get addicted. And they say, well, pot's not addictive. It's only psychologically addictive. Again, find someone in your life who's been smoking pot for 5 years or longer every day, and the longest they're out of pot is like 3 hours waiting for their dealer to come home to buy their next half ounce. Okay? Find somebody like that, and if they're willing, do an experiment where they get off pot for 3 days. Watch what they go through, and tell me pot's not addictive. Okay? And then the other problem is pot's not pot anymore, because the efficiency mandate of North American society has spiked the THC content from anywhere from 5 to 20 times higher. And THC is the ingredient that makes you high. The pot that's available in places like California and Canada now and Colorado, I mean, this stuff is so intoxicating now. I mean, it's right up there with barbiturates or chemicals. It's not the pot. It's not the pot of the 1970s. It's not sinsemilla without seeds. It's not the natural product that God created anymore, because the money people have come in and they've changed it because competition does that. But in this instance, changing a natural product to an unnatural product through hybridization and genetic experimentation into something nature never intended it to be is not a good idea. Okay? And a lot of people get hooked on pot. A lot of people. And so it's very, very addictive. Now, here's the main thing. When you're on pot, you can't properly exchange energy with people. You can't have, for lack of a better way of saying it, a real moment with somebody. You can't really speak heart to heart because the heart gets obfuscated on the pot. Okay? You may disagree with me. Oh, what is Bruce talking about? You know, I like pot. It makes me more open to whatever. You know, a lot of people say they're a better lover on pot. Well, you may be more sensually aware. You may be more sensitive to the touch upon your skin and things like that, and that may make you think you're a better lover. But the spiritual transaction between two people in the act of lovemaking is profoundly compromised when you're high. Profoundly. Okay? So it's the drug of despair. It's the drug that eats time. And if you're eating time, you're not living. And if you're not living, you're showing ingratitude for life. And if you're showing ingratitude for life, you're showing contempt for the Creator. I'm not trying to make you feel bad, whoever needs to hear this today. I'm not trying to. I'm just telling you the truth. Okay? Yeah, but I got to do this, and I really don't like doing this, and pot helps me cope. Okay. All right, I get it. I already gave my own confession. I intermittently used it for a decade. Okay, from about 37 years old. And the only reason I started smoking pot was I lived with the stand-up comedians, and there was always an ounce in the refrigerator. And but I never smoked pot consecutively for 12 months. I would smoke for like 8 weeks. I would do my meditation in the morning before I got high, and then I would, I would if I was working from home or I was working on a book, I would maybe smoke a little bit in the afternoon, and then I would smoke throughout the day. Not overdo it, have a little pipe every couple hours, have a pipe of marijuana, but like you're buzzed all day. And then for me, the wall for me was like anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. It would start at 8 weeks. This voice would start saying to me, "Hey, you got to stop doing this." And I would fight it at first. I would go, "Oh, no, man, there's nothing wrong with this. Haven't you been listening to the Joe Rogan podcast? There's nothing wrong with this." And then eventually I would stop. And the first 3 days were always bad. You get a headache right in the back of your head. That's where the entities go in, by the way. And then you just get over it. And then I remember after you would get off of it, like all addictive things that create a transformation in you, after the 72 hours, you go, "Oh, holy shit. I cannot believe what pot was doing to me." And then another equal amount of time, 8 or 12 weeks would go by, 2 or 3 months, and I would not smoke any marijuana. I would live as clean as clean as a vicar. Okay? That might not be the best example, but you know what I mean. Um, totally clean. Vegetarian lifestyle, no alcohol. Probably the worst thing going on in my life would have been some cigars and coffee. And then something would kick off the weed again, like I'd be out socially and somebody would have it. I'd smoke a joint and I go, "Hey, yeah, it's been a while since I smoked weed. I'm going to get a quarter." I'd go out and spend my $30 on a quarter bag of weed. Take me about 2 weeks to smoke it, and I'd say, "Wow, I'm really enjoying this." Because what was going on was I had built up all my spiritual reserves again. And pot needs something to eat. Okay? To make you feel good, it needs something to eat. And it eats your psychic reserves. That's why you can't manifest properly on pot. And I would just go through the whole cycle again. Smoke for 8 to 12 weeks, stop for 8 to 12 weeks, or 6 months. Most times when I stopped, I would go like, for 3 to 6 months, I would not touch the stuff. And then there would always be this little incident where I smoked again. And the moment I smoked once, boom, I would go right back into it. And then after a while, that all stopped. And then when I came over here, I smoked a little bit up here because all my neighbors smoke, right? And it was a way to be social and meet everybody. I just sort of gradually gave it up. My wife really doesn't like it at all. She's the cleanest living person I've ever met in my life. She has no bad habits. You might say she overindulges in food a little bit, and I don't mean she's not fat or anything like that, but I'd say she eats too much meat. Like she's got a diet like a wolf, right? So everybody's got vices, right? But that's what she does. And then I just kind of got it out of my life altogether, and it's been out of my life for years now. Like when my son comes up once in a while, he didn't smoke this last trip. He actually went 8 weeks clean. But now he's right back to daily smoking again back in Canada. And defending it, saying there's nothing wrong with it. Okay, so I have to let him go through his cycle and learn it himself. Okay? But I'm pretty happy to have it out of my life now. I'm pretty happy. And I never abused it 12 months a year, but there are people out there who are like years and decades of daily pot smoking, and they think there's nothing wrong. Okay? So it also makes finding somebody to love very difficult. Okay? You can't really love somebody when you're on weed. You can't. And if you partner with somebody who doesn't smoke weed, they're going to get very angry with you because at first they'll tolerate it, but then they'll start to realize you're not giving them any real energy because you're high all the time. There's no energy exchange. There's no love exchange in the relationship. And they'll get very angry at you. Okay? So I said today I was going to talk about love, but I really I'll do love tomorrow. Um and explain more about that. I don't know how I ended up on this topic today, but I just did. Um you know, but part of what's going on with weed now, and one of the reasons they've legalized it, is they don't want people fully cognizant. All right. Now, if you pacify people and give them something, you can do a bunch of horrible shit in the background. This is why Trudeau wanted to legalize weed. Okay. This is why Gavin Newsom wanted to legalize it. And look at the state of places where pot is legal. They are, for the most part, being taken apart. You know where there's very little, or you know who doesn't smoke weed? The rest of the world. Okay? The rest of the world. You smoke weed in China or Taiwan, they look at you like you're an idiot because they know you can't get anything done. And those societies are no hesitation, no pausing, no red lights. You got to go 100% all the time just to make it in those societies. To get married, to be able to afford 1 or 2 kids, you have to have your pedal to the metal from 5 years old to about 40. And so, you know what the number one drug was when I was living in Taiwan from 92 to 94? Amphetamines. You know why? It wasn't to have a rave like Jesse Pinkman in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They used amphetamines to study all night for exams, to get into the best graduate programs. So even the drug use in China conformed to the pressure of the society. Okay? So they look at you like you're an idiot if you get high on marijuana in Asia, in Chinese societies. Okay? I think Japan is pretty much the same as well. I don't think there's too much pot smoking in the Middle East. There might be a few sects of Islam that use it. They would say it's ritual or ritualistic, but they're just misleading themselves. The Agori smoke it in India, but there's wild weed growing everywhere in India. Nobody smokes it. But now they're being influenced by the West. You know, that podcast Beer Biceps. You know, he was saying that all the college kids smoke weed now in India. All the university kids are smoking weed now. So we've negatively influenced them. But I don't think they smoke it like North Americans. Okay? And this is the big thing. I mean, like I said, of all the things you can do for a libation. So for example, when I finally do get this tourism company going, and I've got people doing a 2-day hike from my house through the jungle to another town, the night we sleep in the jungle, it might not be a bad idea to have a blunt and to just everybody smoke a little bit of the peace pipe, minus all the people guiding. minus the porters and the guides and all the people working for me. But the tourists can have a smoke because it's actually not a bad experience to be in the middle of a jungle. Like so far, you can't hear. You're in the jungle. You're miles and like dozens of miles from the closest road or town. Okay. And you can't hear anything. It's just the jungle. There's no street noises. There's no cars. It's what it's like up here, except for when my neighbors put on their Latino gangster rap. And then that might not be a bad experience. But look at how the pot would be used there. Incredibly physically arduous day of about 8 or 9 hours of walking through jungle with weight on your back because you got to have your tent, you got to have all your stuff, and the porters are carrying the food. You get through this physically exhausting day, and you have just a little toke to help you sleep in the jungle and to talk around a fire. That's a perfect use for pot, okay? What I'm talking about here is the epidemic of daily usage and how normal that's become, and how that is in very many ways emblematic of people like Joe Rogan. And that goes on his karmic record, by the way, and it's not good. Yeah, I'll do love tomorrow. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.